table was loud with chatterforks scraping plates, children giggling at their own jokes. I sat quietly at the end, listening more than speaking. Lucas leaned back in his chair, eyes on Ayla, then let out a laugh that carried across the room. "You'll never be like her," he said, pointing his thumb toward his wife's mother. "Now that's a woman who knows how to show up for her family." Everyone laughed with him except me. In his hand rested a glossy designer diaper bag, something I had ordered online weeks ago, shipping it directly to their house. It wasn't extravagant, not by my standards, but enough that I skipped a few of my own comforts to afford it. And yet, as he flaunted it, I realized he believed it had come from someone else. I pressed my lips together. I didn't argue. Ayla smiled across the table, nodding as if the compliment were her own victory. "Yes, Mom always thinks ahead," she said smoothly, and the conversation flowed on. No one looked in my direction. No one asked about me. I chewed my food slowly, careful not to let the hurt show. What would be the point? To them, I was predictable. Maren, the one who showed up, kept quiet and filled gaps they never noticed until they were covered. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the house grew still, I sat at my kitchen counter with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. I opened my bank app, scrolling through the list of transfers. Every month, the same figure left my account neat and steady like clockwork. I traced the numbers with my finger on the screen, each one tied to a sacrifice, less for me, more for them. And now, here I was, invisible. My giving had been repackaged, renamed, handed to someone else like a ribbon on a box. I closed the phone, set it on the counter, and sat in silence, my chest tight, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. Tomorrow, I knew I would need to look back at every payment I had ever made. I can still remember the first time Ayla asked me. We were standing in her kitchen, the baby fussing in the high chair dishes stacked in the sink. She lowered her voice like we were sharing a secret. "If you could help with a little each month, it would make things easier. But please don't mention it to Lucas. It's better for his pride. He doesn't like to feel like he's depending on anyone." Her words sounded reasonable at the time. I wanted to respect my son, not wound his pride. I nodded, quietly, agreeing. I told myself it was just a temporary arrangement that Lucas would never need to know. Ayla smiled, relieved, and thanked me with a quick hug before turning back to stir a pot on the stove. That was the moment the pattern began. I set up the transfer the very next day, $2,000, on the first of each month, automatic and discreet. I trimmed my own expenses, let go of small indulgences, and told no one. I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing, helping without asking for recognition. But over time, Ayla's requests grew more specific. The down payment, the summer camp, even furniture for their new house. Always framed as for the kids or for Lucas. Always accompanied by a reminder, let's keep this between us. I accepted the secrecy because I believed it was protecting him. Now, as I replay her words, I hear them differently. Not protection, possession. She had been gathering my sacrifices and dressing them up as her mother's gifts. It wasn't Lucas's pride being shielded. It was her deception being secured. I thought I was invisible by choice, that my silence was an act of love. But Lucas's words at that lunch echoed in me like a verdict. You'll never be like her. He believed every credit belonged to someone else. I opened the drawer where I kept receipts, old notes, and the welcome letter from the bank when I first set up the transfers. My hands shook as I spread the papers out, realizing just how long I had lived inside that lie. The next morning, I walked to the printer in my small office corner and pressed print all. Page after page slid out a steady rhythm of betrayal, made visible in black and white. Each line showed the same number, the same date, month after month. I stacked them carefully as though arranging fragile glass, though what broke wasn't the paper, but the illusion I had lived under. The labels made me pause. For Lucas, I had typed on some. On others, groceries, kids, camp emergency. Small words, casual even, but each one tied to hours of work I had taken on after retirement, side bookkeeping jobs, evenings spent staring at numbers so my son's family wouldn't have to. I remembered Ayla's texts, short, urgent always, with a hint of charm. Could you help just this once, had become 30 times. Then came the down payment. That entry sat heavy on the page, larger than the rest, a figure that had nearly drained me. I remembered signing the wire transfer, my chest tight with worry but full of pride. They were starting their life together, I told myself. I was giving them stability. Now I saw it listed under Ayla's name, her account, swallowing my sacrifice without a word of honesty. Even the nursery set crib rocking chair dresser was etched here. I could still recall rocking the baby in that chair. Lucas telling me how generous Ayla's mother had been. I had smiled then, swallowing the sting. Now the truth sat before me in plain ink. The paper didn't lie. Every dollar had a destination, every sacrifice a record. And yet, somehow, I had been erased. People lie. They reshape the story until you're nothing more than a shadow on the edge of the page. I gathered the stack, set it on the table, and rested my hand on top. Cold, thin sheets, but they carried the weight of years. For the first time, I wondered not about the money itself, but about the role I had allowed myself to play. I looked toward the living room, where the phone still sat silent, and realized the silence would not last. A few days later, I stopped by their house to drop off some muffins I had baked. The kids ran to greet me, tugging at my sleeve, their laughter softening the knot in my chest. I set the basket on the counter, and was about to call out for Ayla when I heard her voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone bright, performative. "My mom always comes through," she said, laughing lightly. "Lucas is lucky to have her." I froze. My hands, still dusted with flour from baking, pressed against the edge of the counter. Every muscle in me tightened, but I stayed silent, listening as she went on. "We'd never have managed without her. She's covered so much, the house, the kids' stuff, even the nursery. Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without her." The words hit harder than any slap could. Each gift, each deposit, each long night I had sat, balancing my checkbook, they had all been erased, replaced by a story that made me invisible. I looked at the basket of muffins. Even here, even in something so small, I knew she would present them later as her own effort. It wasn't just the money. It was the pattern. A rewriting of reality where my place was always behind a curtain, silent, unseen. The weight of my silence pressed on me heavier than the stack of statements waiting on my kitchen table. I had let her craft this version of life because I thought I was protecting Lucas's pride. But pride wasn't what had been protected. It was her performance. I turned, walked back to the door, and stepped outside before she saw me. The children's laughter trailed after me as I stood on the porch, breathing in the heavy afternoon air. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me, not just hurt, not just disappointment, a resolve sharp and steady. I had been erased by my own compliance, but I would not remain silent forever. That night, I sat down again at my table and opened my banking app, my finger hovering over the transfers. The decision came quietly, not with rage, but with a calm that surprised me. I sat at the table with my laptop open, the stack of statements beside me like witnesses. The numbers lined up in my mind as clearly as rows of soldiers. I hovered over the cancel recurring transfer button. My pulse quickened, but there was no doubt left. One click. That was all it took. The page refreshed, and the schedule that had drained me for 2 years disappeared. The weight I had been carrying seemed to lift, though not completely. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the first step toward it. I closed the laptop and sat back staring at the quiet kitchen. No announcement. No fight. No dramatic confrontation. Just absence money that would no longer appear where they had learned to expect it. 2 days passed before the first message arrived. Isla's text blinked across my phone screen. The payment didn't arrive. No greeting, no warmth, only expectation. Wrapped in confusion, I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering above the keyboard. Then I typed back slow and deliberate, "It won't." That was all. No explanation, no justification. For once, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. The silence that followed was louder than any reply she could have sent. Hours passed, then a full day, my phone sitting untouched on the counter. I imagined her scrambling, rehearsing what to tell Lucas, weighing whether to admit the truth or twist the story further. I brewed myself a cup of coffee and carried it to the porch, letting the steam rise in the cool evening air. The taste was strong grounding. For years, I had lived as though my worth depended on what I provided. Now, for the first time, I had said no without raising my voice. The next morning, I heard the sound of footsteps on my front walk. When I opened the door, Lucas was standing there, his face pale and tight with questions. Lucas stood on my porch, shifting from foot to foot, as if unsure whether to come in. When I opened the door, his eyes darted past me, scanning the quiet house like he expected answers to be waiting in the corners. "Mom," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't want to ask my mother-in-law again. She's already done so much. Isla's stressed the bills are well, you know." I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had canceled the transfers, and looked smaller than I remembered. His voice carried a nervous edge, but beneath it, I heard something else, blind faith in a story that was never his. I reached for the folder I had placed on the counter days earlier. The weight of it was nothing compared to what it held. Sliding into the chair opposite him, I set it down and opened it slowly. "Ask her." I repeated, my voice steady. "Lucas, you need to see this." One by one, I laid out the statements. Neat rows of dates and amounts stretched across the table like a timeline of my silence. 2 years, I said quietly. Every month. For the house, the groceries, the nursery, even the camp fees. His eyes followed the columns at first with disbelief, then confusion, and finally, something heavier. He picked up one page, scanned it, then another. His lips parted as though to protest, but no words came. The smile he had worn at lunch, the pride in his voice when he praised another woman, both drained from his face. He looked at me, the papers trembling slightly in his hands, and for the first time in a long time, he seemed like a boy again, caught between shame and realization. The silence stretched until it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Then he set the papers down with care, as though they might burn him, and looked at me with eyes that no longer carried certainty. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him, knowing the weight of it was now his to carry. The folder stayed with Lucas when he left my kitchen, though I never asked him to take it. He tucked it under his arm, like evidence he wasn't ready to face. When the door closed behind him, the house felt strangely lighter. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in the quiet, waiting for the storm that didn't come. Days stretched into a week. My phone stayed silent. No texts, no calls, not even a casual check-in. For years, the rhythm of our lives had been tied to those transfers, unspoken, but steady. Now, with them gone, there was only emptiness. The second week passed much the same. I went about my days, morning walks, errands, evenings spent reading, but every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my chest tightened. It was never him. I wondered if he was angry if he had chosen to side with Ayla and bury the truth along with me. Then late one night, the message came. Just a single line on the screen, "Mom, I didn't know." No excuses, no explanations. Just those 4 words. I read them again and again, each time feeling a different weight settle in my chest. There was regret in them, Yes, but also something that resembled the boy I had raised, the one who once brought me wildflowers from the yard and said I was the best mom in the world. Still, I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed the silence to stand. For years, I had filled every gap with reassurance, every pause with understanding. This time, I let the space grow, let the silence do its work. Nights passed, the message still unanswered. I kept busy, but the words lingered, following me through every room of the house. He had finally seen the truth, but only after living years inside a lie. On the 15th day, I heard a knock at the door, softer than usual, hesitant. When I opened it, Lucas stood there again, this time without Ayla, and without the confidence he used to carry like armor. When I opened the door, Lucas stood with 2 paper cups in his hands. He didn't step forward until I moved aside, and even then he walked carefully, like a guest, unsure of his welcome. He set the cups on the table without looking at me, the steam rising between us. "I thought you might like a coffee," he said softly. He didn't try to hug me, and I didn't offer. We sat across from each other, the silence stretching, until he finally spoke again. I was so proud of being independent. He admitted, his eyes fixed on the table. Turns out I never was. All those years I believed I was standing on my own. But it was you, always you. I watched him, unsure whether to feel relief or sorrow. For so long I had wanted him to see me, but the recognition came late, almost bitter in its arrival. Still, the words landed with weight. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph worn at the edges. He placed it gently in front of me. I looked down and saw myself holding his newborn, my hair messy, my face tired but glowing with joy. He had taken it the day I first met his son. "I found this in an old box," he said. "I realized I've had proof all along of who really stood beside me. I just didn't look closely enough." I touched the photo, tracing the blurred outline of the baby's hand on my shoulder. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Words would have thinned the moment. Lucas leaned back, his face heavy with regret. "I don't know if I can fix what's broken," he whispered, "but I don't want to keep living like I did, blind to you." I folded the photo back into the envelope and placed it on the table between us. For the first time, I saw not just my son, but a man stripped of his illusions, waiting to see if I would let him try again. The next weekend, he returned, this time with the children by his side. The following Saturday, I heard small voices before I even opened the door. When I stepped outside, the children ran to me, arms outstretched, their laughter filling the yard. Behind them, Lucas stood with a sheepish smile, his hands full of coloring books and a paper bag of crayons. Ayla wasn't with them. "Thought we could spend the afternoon here," he said, almost tentative. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. I set out a tray of simple snacks. Apple slices, crackers, cheese. The kids carried their crayons to the porch, spreading the pages across the table. Soon, the quiet of the house was broken by the sound of coloring pencils scratching and bursts of excitement as they showed off their messy rainbows and crooked houses. Lucas sat down beside them, at first helping sharpen crayons, then drifted to the kitchen, where he poured juice into cups, without needing to ask where things were. When the kids spilled crumbs, he was the one to sweep them up. I noticed the difference, not grand gestures, but small, steady movements of presence. I joined the children on the porch, letting them chatter. One drew a picture of a tree and wrote Grandma's house across the top in shaky letters. My throat tightened, but I smiled and taped it to the fridge later where it belonged. As evening settled, we ate sandwiches together, no mention of money, no edge in his voice. For once, the weight of what had passed stayed outside, replaced by the easy rhythm of family. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something quieter, an attempt. When the dishes were done, Lucas stayed behind to help me dry them, stacking plates carefully before carrying the trash out to the bin. He didn't fill the silence with apologies or explanations. Neither did I. We simply moved together in a way we hadn't for years. After he loaded the kids into the car, he paused at the door. His eyes met mine, not pleading, just steady. Then he nodded once and drove away. The next morning, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, addressed in Lucas's handwriting. The envelope was thin, the kind that usually carried bills or notices, but the handwriting stopped me cold. Lucas's script, uneven from years of rushing through life, spelled out my name across the front. I carried it inside, sat at the table, and slid a butter knife under the seal. Inside was a neat stack of papers. At first glance, I thought they were more bills. But as I spread them out, I recognized them instantly, my own bank statements. He had printed them again, but this time, each page was marked in his handwriting. January nursery set. April down payment. July groceries. Each line, labeled month after month like a record of debt, finally acknowledged. At the very top on a single sheet of notebook paper, he had written, "Thank you for every one of these, and for not throwing them in my face." I held the page in my hands for a long time. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. For years I had been invisible, the invisible provider, the quiet hand that filled the gaps. Now at last, the weight of those sacrifices was seen, not twisted, not given away. A small smile crept across my face, the kind I hadn't felt in a long time. Not joy, exactly, but recognition. I set the letter down beside my coffee cup and reached for the creamer, pouring a slow stream into the dark liquid. The swirl of white softened the black until it turned a warm shade of brown, a reminder that even bitterness can be changed with something simple. I stirred, took a sip, and let the silence fill the room. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Lucas had written his first real thank you, and though the past couldn't be erased, something new had begun in its place. I folded the note carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the drawer where I kept things worth remembering.